It's time for a wake-up call. Tonight, we're tackling the hidden dangers of vaccines and the lack of accountability. While scandals like Epstein and Russiagate spark outrage, where's the fury for human lives lost to unsafe vaccines? No one's held responsible, and change is not coming fast enough. It's time to expose the links between baby vaccines and SIDS cover-ups. Then Dr. Peter McCullough reveals the history of vaccines, their ties to autism and death, and the ideology silencing safety questions. The news you need to know, but with solutions and hope. This is Get Free with Christy Lee. Not the lighthearted intros that I normally have here on Get Free. We like to stay positive, but this is too important to dismiss, too important not to make sure you're not paying attention. We have to listen up, parents, because our population is already decreasing. The abortion industry is cashing in on killing babies, and whatever babies they don't murder in the womb, they risk killing with an endless and increasing list of required jabs. The MAHA movement isn't saving our babies fast enough, so it is up to us. We need to educate ourselves and then spread the word to save lives. It's time we give infants a voice. Joining us is Shaz Khan, author of The Ultimate Vaccine Timeline, exposing links between baby vaccines and SIDS cover-ups. Khan is an expert researcher with certifications and courses in nutrition, marketing and communications, anatomy and physiology, and immunobiology and vaccinology. After months spent researching in libraries and national archives, she discovered the undisclosed safety history of vaccines and the scope of injuries observed following their administration that were acknowledged by authorities. Her commitment to the truth, freedom, and the preservation of health is the motivation behind this. Shaz, thank you so much for joining us. Such an important topic, and one that, quite frankly, we as independent media should be talking about more. But we're guilty of getting caught up in all of the hysteria of all the other scandals and controversies. But, it really comes down to life, saving lives.
Thank you, Christy, for having me. Yes, it's a very important subject, and since COVID, it's gotten even more intensified, but it's really important that we get the word out and we share this information.
Absolutely. It is encouraging. We have covered on this show and other shows here on LindellTV the amount of parents that are now opting to exempt out of some of these vaccines. It's steadily increasing, these exemption forms. So, of course, the American Academy of Pediatrics is trying to recommend that there be no exceptions. They have to keep these vaccines alive. It is really wild to see the commitment that some doctors and scientists have to following this vaccine schedule. And there's just so much information and evidence out there that indicates how dangerous this is.
Yeah, but it's become a massive market. So, of course, it's a huge threat to the vaccine industry if they were supposed to, if they lost confidence of the public completely and basically couldn't sell their products anymore, I think we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people would be out of a job. So there's lots of money in vaccine development, especially now after COVID with this pandemic preparedness whole scheme going on. Vaccines are seen as the only salvation possible for a pandemic. And we saw that also during COVID, how they suppress other treatments in favor of vaccination. Again, I would say it's a money factor. Maybe there's other factors as well. But yeah, it's for me, I'm not even a parent. So I'm not in science, I'm not a medical doctor. But when I found out this information and when I discovered it in libraries, because most of this information is not available online, I was absolutely shocked and really quite pissed off, to be quite honest. That's why I wanted to put it in a book that I could share with people. There would be an ultimate reference guide that will help people make decisions and also look at the history of where we've come from vaccinations, because they're rewriting history. And especially now with AI, we can see how AI, obviously it's limited to what it gets access to. And it never seems to talk about any of the problems that we've had with vaccines. And we're just glossing over the problems that we've had. And the government authorities, they can keep their documents in the libraries. And only people who are geek enough like me to go and try to get access to them or ask for freedom of information requests actually can see this information. So I think it's incredibly concerning. And it's very important that people get informed.
Yeah, so important. As you said, you really can't find this information readily available on the internet. You know, just preparing for this interview, I was like doing some Googling, like knowing I wasn't going to find any um, relevant information, but I was just curious. And it's just like there's been sprinkled here and there news reports like breaking, possible new SIDS connection. And they go through all of these connections that they know of and what now they're learning could be a connection. Anything from, of course, we've all heard the baby positioning when they sleep, but now they talk about certain genes could be at fault, but they of course never mention the vaccines ever. Like that's not even mentioned, and they act like that's debunked. So tell me what you found that helps, I guess, debunk the debunkers, right?
Well, the first thing that's worthwhile knowing is that deaths after vaccines have been occurring since the day vaccines started being given. So obviously we know about Jenner and his smallpox vaccination, which wasn't even an injection back in the days. It was kind of like a scratch on the surface of your skin, but that could kill you. And also the earlier technique of that, which is variolation, where they would take smallpox and crusts, for instance, and blow it up your nose, or again, scrape it onto the skin. They knew that there was a lot of danger with that. And then fast forward to the rabies vaccine development by Louis Pasteur, who was a chemist, not biologist or a doctor, and he didn't deal with living organisms. There was always dangers, there were deaths, and they often were swept under the carpet. Some of them were acknowledged and actually reported in medical literature, but again, sometimes only in obscure newspapers or in some journals, but again, kind of like lost to present day understanding and knowledge. Encephalitis, neurological injury, is one of the main injuries that have occurred after vaccination. And as I said, has been acknowledged as death has as well. There have been deaths after polio vaccines. There have been deaths, and this is the big one, is a DTP shot. That was probably the shot that had the most obvious problems with it, and that was why the American public in the end started basically suing the manufacturers out of existence. Hence, then in 1986, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program came into place to protect the manufacturers and to create kind of a fund to compensate these children who were damaged or who killed. Which just remind people today that if your child dies after a vaccine, you're entitled to $250,000. That's basically what your child's life is worth. In developing countries, it's about $40,000, and here in Switzerland, it's about $70,000. So they put price tags basically on what a life is worth, and I found that also quite concerning. But fast forward also to the Institute of Medicine. So the Institute of Medicine, now called the National Academy of Medicine, is basically was mandated by the CDC to do investigations. They started with polio vaccines because we know the polio vaccine problems that they had, which eventually they stopped using the oral polio because it was causing polio. We still use that vaccine in developing countries, by the way. And they started doing regular kind of investigations into vaccine science to see what the science said about safety. And it's interesting because they did two reports specifically on SIDS, one in 1991, and the last one that I'm aware of was in 2003. And they didn't even look at the whole vaccine schedule, all the vaccines, but they looked at the DTaP, the diphtheria tetanus double shot, which doesn't exist anymore, hepatitis B, oral polio, and inactivated polio vaccine. And already in 91, they basically assessed that there was not enough scientific literature to what's the word? It's inadequate to accept or reject causation between the vaccines causing death and the hepatitis B, OPV, so oral polio, and the inactivated polio. And it is similar analysis in 2003, where they looked at a few more vaccines and they included the Hib in this one. And they still, their conclusion was basically the literature is inadequate to accept or reject causation between DTaP, Hib, OPV, IPV, and multiple vaccines given together. So then we know that there still has not been a single study funded by the government to look at the whole childhood vaccine schedule and to really assess its safety. And we also know that they don't use placebos, real placebos. They've changed the definition of placebos in the preclinical trials. So you don't have an adequate safety baseline when you bring these products to market. And as we all, I think some of us might remember during COVID when they started recommending it to children, and we had Eric Rubin, who's the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine and also on the ACIP, I don't think he's there anymore, hopefully not, who said that you can't basically test the safety until you roll it out into, thousands and hundreds of thousands of children, which this is unacceptable. We wouldn't let a single other product on the market have that kind of free pass. And there's no other product that I know of that is given complete liability for any problems.
Now, one thing that I know that you cover in your book is um, this ability that they have to classify potential vaccine-related fatalities as not being that. So, can you explain that?
So I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, when you classify it, I mean, I'll take the example of a death, because usually death certificates are probably the most reliable, well, one of the most reliable reports you can look at. You have an ICD code. Applies to Switzerland, where I'm based, or it applies to the US. It's the International Classification of Diseases. It used to be called the International Classification of Death, and one of the first codes was actually for smallpox death. I mean, death after smallpox vaccination. Sorry, I was quite surprised to find that out. So if you don't have a code that attributes, vaccination death potentially with that ICD code, you can't actually put it in the report. And up until, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1970s, they had ICD codes specifically for deaths and injuries following specific vaccines, because I knew that they could cause problems. But then they changed it, and they basically got rid of those codes, and they changed it into a very convoluted system, which I map out in my book, so you can see how the codes change and when they change. It's very hard to actually track the injuries, because the codes are changing every kind of like 12, 15 years. And it's incredibly complex. I mean, even the WHO doesn't put these codes specifically to vaccine injury in their official guide. I mean, I hope they change that, but that was very, very suspicious for me. And they're aware that, and it's called basically poisoning by biologic substances. So they've kind of watered down what used to be a very good coding system, which could help identify if it was an injury after a specific vaccine. And now they've kind of like gotten away with it. And also, when the American Academy of Pediatrics, when there was basically a public outcry about SIDS following vaccinations, and they blamed it on, you're putting your baby on its stomach instead of its back, when they were using that campaign to prove that SIDS was going down, well, they had another ICD code of suffocation, which those SIDS diagnosis, which would have been under SIDS before, were shifted to suffocation. So they didn't come up as SIDS, so that they created the illusion that SIDS had gone down after their campaign. So there's all kinds of very insidious ways that they can get around not, putting any kind of blame on the vaccine. And then on top of it, it's very difficult nowadays, because we have combined vaccines, to actually be able to identify what the specific antigen or specific problem might be. And we know that doctors in general don't really want to admit that something they might have recommended would have caused injury. And there's like a systematic, and I would call it pathological denial, basically, between the medical establishment. And it's not all their fault, because they're not educated. They're not educated to understand and to recognize the injuries that are following vaccinations. They barely get an education on vaccination unless they do further training, which tends to be financed and sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry. So there's a lot of lack of knowledge, which, if the education system could adapt to inform doctors what to look for and know how to treat some of these side effects as well, I think that would help enormously. But of course, the first acknowledgement is that we appreciate that vaccines can be dangerous, and maybe we should look at the schedule and reassess it.
Yeah, as you were talking about the recoding and then basically the abolishing of the coding, I couldn't help but think we've done stories on the deception when it comes to crime in big blue cities, right? And they're always saying, we had a lowering of fatalities. We didn't have as much crime last year, or whatever the case may be. And if you dig a little bit deeper, it's because it wasn't reported. So if you don't report it, then it's like, oh, I guess it just never happened. And so that's what it reminds me of. It was an inconvenient truth. And so they're like, oh, we can't have these codes. It'll be extremely difficult to tie it back to vaccines. So this is the way we go. I mean, even with the VAERS system, I'm told by doctors it's incredibly difficult to use that system. So when you do want to report a potential problem, it would be a very long and arduous process to actually report it, so that actually gets underreported. So I mean, there's so much wrong with even the lack of interest in tracking and finding out ways to save lives. I mean, that's what it fundamentally comes down to, is how can people with a clear conscience turn a blind eye to the fact that we're not even tracking this?
No, it's a problem here in Switzerland as well, and it's a problem they've known for many decades, and they haven't done anything really to kind of rectify that. The only thing that we saw that was during COVID, or well, actually it was 3 months after the campaign already started, is they put a simplified format simplified form, that people could fill out if they had any injuries following the COVID vaccine. But then what we saw is that Swissmedic, our FDA, has basically kind of gone behind that and, I would say trafficked some of the data to say, well, it's not, we don't consider it serious because you weren't hospitalized. And managed to basically manipulate a lot of the data and come out with a statement saying that the 236 people, I think, who reported, and this is just reported, dead after the COVID vaccine, it was not linked to the vaccine. So there's a systematic denial from the public health authorities. And if that doesn't change from the top up, then it's going to be very hard for that to trickle down towards like all the medical associations and the state medical boards and even the hospitals. But it's very concerning and quite frankly, it's unacceptable. I mean, if we do really care about children's lives, I mean, we're talking about babies here. If they really cared about them, they would have done something already about 50 years ago. But we're seeing that this effort to put in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, which was supposed to support, those rare injured in the name of public good, it's a horribly underperforming system. It's become very litigious, even though it was supposed to not. The reason why it was existing outside the regular court system was to make it, easier. But sometimes people have to wait 5 years before they get a ruling, and then most of them are dismissed. So if somebody does really want to continue suing, well, they then have to go and sue in the regular standard way, and it's very hard because you're up against, the public health authorities, the pharmaceutical industry, and their experts. And for the consumer to have to prove that their product is dangerous, I think already is unacceptable. They should be able to prove it's safe before it's brought to market, which they haven't to this day. They still haven't with lacking placebos and long-term studies. And when I did my vaccinology course in Oxford, what I was shocked to find, because I would have thought this would evolve a little bit, is they don't look at anything else but the immune system when they're studying vaccines. It's like it's an isolated system that doesn't operate in connection with your nervous system, your digestive system. And let's not forget that we're giving these babies injections at a time where their nervous system is incredibly underdeveloped, not to mention all the other organs.
Yeah, again, when I was looking into, if you type in YouTube baby vaccination, there was all these videos of babies getting vaccinated, and I saw so many NICU babies. Oh, baby's first vaccine in the NICU, and it was just made me want to throw up. I mean, like these are the most prone to being fragile, and you're going to give all these introduce all this foreign stuff into a NICU baby. I mean, it's bad enough in a baby fresh born healthy that you would pump them full of foreign, before they can even develop an immune system. A couple of things I want to point out. It came out, I believe, in a hearing that there really is no benefit, even if you're believing in the science, there really is no benefit to giving a vaccine before the age of 6 months, because it's supposed to strengthen an immune system. But if the immune system hasn't even begun to develop, then, when questioned about this in a hearing, they were saying like, no, there's really no benefit before 6 months. Okay, well then why do you push them before 6 months? And then the answer was that to get parents used to that they would need to come back in intervals. I don't know if that came out in your research.
I have to admit, I didn't look specifically at court hearings and court cases. I had my nose stuck in books and some old records, but I did look at some older court cases. So I don't know if this was something recent, but I hadn't heard that. But that's come across in a lot of scientific documentation, because it's simply well acknowledged, especially if a baby is breastfed, the antibodies and the protection they're going to get from the breast milk is going to kind of like override anything that they get from vaccines potentially. And this is one of the reasons why I wouldn't give a MMR before 6 months. This tends to be the live attenuated that they hold off on. But yeah, they want to get parents used to a system where they have to come back, on a regular basis on a well baby visit, which is just a ridiculous name in my opinion, and pretty much get them into this like habit of you're going to come every few months, you get your injections, etc., and we're going to get you dependent on a system. Because I would love to see a study where they see, and I think there has been a study of a unvax where we see different kinds of asthma, ADHD, all those kinds of things which seem to be higher in the vaccinated populations, but also to look at the number of kids who are hospitalized in general after they get a vaccine, because I hear that a lot where I see my friends who have got kids who have to send their kid to a hospital within a month of getting a vaccine, but by that point, they don't make the connection. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But in my opinion, it's a very tough thing, because you're up against a giant machine, and the belief
and
and the belief
censorship and
absolutely
ridicule and so much. But let's talk about the connections. Those are very clear. If you are willing to look, you can start to see some of these connections. You can start to see these correlations. And so if you bring up a correlation, they're quick to say, oh, a correlation doesn't equal causation. But I mean, how much do things have to be correlated before you start to be concerned? If people will allow themselves just to look, the correlations are very clear. I know that in your book, you talk about the correlations. Tell me what you were able to discover when it comes to infant deaths and when babies were getting vaccinated.
Well, something that has come up is we vaccinate now at younger ages than we did back in the days. Like we didn't start as early as 2 months, or in the US and other countries from birth. I mean, getting hepatitis B. But it seems to be that there's already been, since the very beginning, and again, from the 1800s, there was like a systematic denial of this potential link, not wanting to see the potential correlation and just kind of, passing it off as coincidence. Or in what we're now saying is like, it's bad genes, so it's your kid's fault type thing. But this is seen systematically throughout history, and especially with the polio vaccine, which is quite interesting, because I often am confronted with, hey, well, polio vaccine saved us from polio, and how can you say that vaccines are bad when they saved us from that horrible disease? Polio, this is interesting. They reclassified vaccinated, unvaccinated, very much like they did with COVID. So you see this pattern of history repeating itself. And that's why I thought a timeline actually was a good way to show this story, is because it helps you connect the dots as well between different incidents and seeing how the same playbook is being used. But people who were getting polio, like within a week of having the injection, were considered unvaccinated. And there was a lot of polio after injections. And this was already acknowledged since the 1940s of provocation poliomyelitis, they called it, and up until like 1 in 30,000 kids, it was some formulations, and they did already investigate and understand it was aluminum that was causing some problems, but it didn't seem to be the only factor. But there's been a systematic, at least in the public eye, a systematic dismissal of these potential correlations and putting it down to other factors and trying to blame the actual victims, like, it's bad genes, or, your mother was mothering you or something like that. I mean, many of the early SIDS or even just injuries after vaccines were often blamed on the mother, especially autism. As we all know, in the beginning, it was, this refrigerator mother theory, etc. So they will try to find any other story to kind of put the blame on, except like looking at the actual vaccines and think, okay, maybe we shouldn't be injecting this into the system without really understanding what it does. Because I remind people that aluminum, we still don't completely understand the biological mechanisms and what it does in the body. We know that it works, at least to induce an immune reaction, an inflammation. But how it does it, I mean, up until like 10 years ago, they still really had no idea. And we're only still starting to elucidate that recently.
And so, I mean, we're focused on obviously the worst case scenario, death, particularly when it comes to the epidemic of SIDS, and trying to find every other reason it could possibly happen other than vaccines. But what are, in your research, were you able to find a connection with other problems or side effects? Maybe we briefly mentioned ADHD. I was thinking of like allergies. All of a sudden you have to be so careful about, for I have 2 little ones, and if I send them to be watched somewhere, I always have to ask, is it okay if I send my child with a snack that has peanut butter in it? Because it's like that's a thing. That didn't used to be a thing, but now you have to be careful about that kind of stuff.
Well, it's funny, allergies against injected proteins that weren't, which were foreign to the body, has been acknowledged again since the early 20th century. And there was even an ICD code, ICD 999, which was serum sickness. So they knew that it was a specific disease attributed to being injected with foreign proteins and could often trigger allergies. Now, we didn't have peanut allergies back in the days, because I think that might have been a result of the peanut-based adjuvants that we were using in vaccines in the 60s. We don't use them so much anymore, but still. So this again was acknowledged, and we had an ICD code to represent it, which has been wiped from it's been wiped from the code now. Just as we had post-vaccination encephalitis, which was an ICD code E941. Post-immunization jaundice and hepatitis. These were all recognized conditions following vaccines and have been, massaged out of the current administrative processes, I would say, with regards to coding, which is now used for billing primarily. So, but these problems have been, again, acknowledged and seen and reported about since the early 20th century. Now, when I was doing the research, I didn't come up against specific information about ADHD or asthma, etc. But what kept coming back and back and back was neurological diseases. And I would argue that neurological diseases, obviously from the less serious neurological disease, could be anxiety, could be ADHD, to the extreme of having encephalitis and potential death. But there's a big, I would say, spectrum between that of different types of neurological problems that we don't even really recognize as being connected to vaccines because they might occur much later on because of the cumulative effect, and also maybe a co-factor with other toxins that you're exposed through your food or air. But these problems have been acknowledged for a long time. And what pisses me off is that, again, it's being buried. It's not being talked about, and we're just kind of sweeping it under the carpet. And all these conditions, we're just normalizing them, like trying to normalize autism, like it's just, neurodiversity, which, again, these people should be supported. But we shouldn't be normalizing conditions which are obvious neurological disorders, I would say.
And I want to repeat this because, we kind of glossed over it before, but, we're constantly gaslit with, any connection between SIDS and vaccines has been debunked, or there's no evidence. But you have, and can lay out in your book, you have government documents that would suggest otherwise. They might not say there is, but doesn't it explicitly say that it can't be ruled out?
Well, there are some government documents that just quite clearly admit that, vaccines can kill kids sometimes. And even there was one document I found that said often, which was concerning. But they were in that case, they were speaking specifically of the DTP shot, which was known to be incredibly reactogenic. And that's why we don't use that version anymore here in the Western nations. We still use it in developing nations, unfortunately. But no, government documents, they admitted that there were deaths. I found a document in the Swiss archives from 1946 where they admitted post-vaccination encephalitis causing death occurred 1 in 33,000 cases. And we were talking about children because they were the ones who were targeted for the smallpox vaccine campaign, which was briefly obligatory in Switzerland between 44 and 48, I believe it was. So they had to compensate those cases of injury. But they've been acknowledged. It's now hidden and buried in the archives. Hopefully nobody will look at it, and let's just try to rewrite history. But they haven't acknowledged it for a long time, and not in 1 in a million, because 1 in a million is always that number they come out, which is exceedingly rare. It's not exceedingly rare. And when you look at the package inserts of the manufacturers, their definition of rare could be up to 1 in 1,000, which for me is not rare.
No, it's not. Especially not considered rare when it happens to you or someone their baby dies after vaccination. That doesn't feel rare to you when it gets personal. Well, I'm already out of time, but Shaz, you have your book. One thing we didn't get to is the connection of the Rockefellers. I mean, so that's fascinating. Just a little teaser there. If you want to find out how this can even go back to the Rockefellers, then that's another reason to get the book. Where's the best place to pick it up?
So you can purchase it from any major retailer, so Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. I also highly recommend supporting your local bookstore and getting it ordered in if you can. So those are the main places you can find it. And then obviously the ultimatevaccinetimeline.com is the website that I've put up, where you can also get direct access to the Amazon purchase locations and some sample chapters, so you can see a bit how it's presented and what the book looks like. Sorry.
Well, it's just such an important topic, how I began this thing was, sometimes if all we can do is educate ourselves so that we're able to educate others and spread the word, then we have to dive in. We have to be committed to that, because we can't wait for someone else to do something about it. Because chances are humans will let you down, but we can do our part to try and save lives. So thank you for this information. Thank you for making it possible for us to have a resource to educate others.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much for giving me a platform to speak about it.
Of course. Thank you so much. Well, up next, we are continuing the conversation. We are joined by Dr. Peter McCullough. I spoke with him about how we got here and why we're not able to question the science, which obviously isn't scientific at all. But Dr. McCullough is also very passionate on this topic, so don't miss that. But first, just want to remind you that, we are not funded by Soros, definitely not funded by China. It all comes from viewers like you. If this is a topic that you're passionate about, you want more people to know about it, share this episode. And then while you're at it, make sure that you're supporting the father of LindellTV, where you get to Get Free with Christy Lee, and go to mypillow.com and use promo code KL. They do have a tracking system there. So if you use that promo code KL, they're able to see, okay, people are watching this show. So send them a message. Make sure that you let them know that you appreciate this by picking up your favorite towels or sheets. Maybe you need a dog bed. There's so many different products. There's being added products all the time. So be sure to check back mypillow.com often and get yourself some gifts there, which in turn keeps us on air, keeps us able to amplify voices that are not heard from, actually be a voice for the voiceless, which is, what you're supposed to do when you're a journalist. But obviously that art has been lost. So stick around for that. Dr. Peter McCullough, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes. Parents, they're clearly more hesitant now to follow that vaccine schedule, as the alarmists on the network news are pointing out. And now you have a new book that can actually be a great resource in making these very important decisions. It's so scary anytime you make a decision about your children. You want to do what's best for them. And so I don't like vilifying people that choose to follow the vaccine schedule, because there is so much fear used in doing so. But tell me about this book and how it can relate to helping parents make these decisions, because clearly hesitancy is coming into play.
Well, this book is really a historical accounting of what's happened over the development of vaccines, starting back from the early 18th century. And you're right, fear has been a big part of it, fear of infectious diseases. And rightly so. 300 years ago, when we didn't have antibiotics, we didn't understand what was even causing these illnesses. Much different today, though, very different. And the common theme, though, through this whole field of vaccinology is fear, a lot of hubris, that is, a lot of bravado by the vaccinators, those who claim that they can improve upon mankind and God's creation. A lot of money and power from the very beginning. And boy, did we see that come to full light during COVID-19.
Yes, we did. And it was something that couldn't be ignored. Now we're seeing that they're really trying to use this measles narrative, like, there was an outbreak, and it's directly related to the fact that there's now vaccine hesitancy and disinformation out there. What do you say about this this alleged rise in measles and how they're using this to change the story?
Every year in the United States, there are several hundred, even up to several thousand cases of measles. But to give you an idea, we're at about 1,200 cases in the United States. And they occur in those who took the vaccine and those who didn't. But, worldwide, some years we hit 600,000. 600,000. So 1,200 in the United States is essentially nothing. Now, there shouldn't be any measles deaths if they're properly treated with protocols, including immunoglobulin for contacts, vitamin A, secondary antibiotics, steroids for the pneumonitis and encephalitis. So sadly, the quote measles deaths we've seen so far in the United States is because of inadequate treatment, not because of measles. And the CDC is disingenuous. They report that 95% are unvaccinated or vaccine status unknown. And let me tell you, that second part of that is not right. The CDC knows the vaccine status, and if they don't, they should, because they're interviewing every case. And so the bottom line is the CDC really doesn't want to tell us how many people took the measles shots and still get measles anyway.
Interesting. So yeah, it makes it very evident on how they're gaslighting in that narrative as well. The thing I really like about this new book is you're taking it all the way back to basically how vaccines started. I learned something new. I didn't know vacca is from the Latin word, as I understand it, of cow. Tell me about how vaccines started picking up and how it's evolved into now you need like almost 90 vaccines from the time that you're an infant till you're 18.
Right. So you picked up on this. We divide the timeline from what we call the Great Prelude, from smallpox vaccination, early 18th century, through experimentation and development, late 18th, early 19th and 20th centuries, and then the modern vaccination era, 1947 and forward. And finally, this is really distressing, 2004 forward, we call it the bioweapons era, where now the biggest interest in vaccines has to do with biological warfare. What we've seen is this hubris, this idea that infectious disease threats never change, and that all we can do is just add more vaccines on. So in our book, we actually highlight Dr. Poling. He was a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, and this is astonishing. In the vignette that happened to his child, and I can tell you that he was in the vaccine injury compensation program himself. He's a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, and that's in chapter 19, Intrigue in the U.S. Court of Vaccine Claims. And the scenario that happened to his daughter is something that will be familiar, sadly, to many of your followers. A 19-year-old girl was born after a 19-month-old girl was born after a normal full-term delivery, no family history of autism or affective neuromuscular hearing disorders. Her development was progressing well with normal receptive and expressive language and use of pre-linguistic gestures. This is actually from Dr. Poling in a case report. Several of her shots were delayed because she had ear infections, so she had to catch up. And within 48 hours, she took within 48 hours of the immunizations, and they were the following: diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, Haemophilus influenza B, measles, mumps, and rubella, polio, and varicella. She develops a fever, gets very, very sick, and within a few days or weeks develops autism. Dr. Poling publishes this as a case report, and he's in the vaccine injury compensation omnibus. You know what happened is our federal government actually separated him out, compensated him, took him out as a test case, and they rejected all the other cases as not being associated with vaccination. So the great concern, Christy, is not only the COVID shot. Parents are afraid of large numbers of vaccines given in combination, then the child getting very sick, the elevation of a fever. In a paper by Nielsen and colleagues from Sweden, when a febrile seizure occurs, there's sick enough to have a fever, and then a seizure in the child, there's a 40% chance they convert to a serious neuropsychiatric condition like autism.
Wow. I mean, one of the things that is just so basically troubling and wild to me, with me having a 7-month-old baby right now, I feel like I'm in the algorithm of it. I'm getting all the infant type stuff. It's just so wild to me that when you're pregnant, you're told, don't eat lunch meat, don't eat sushi, don't even have a drop of alcohol. And when that baby comes, make sure that when you introduce food, you do it a week apart for each food. I mean, there's like many things. Is it like hysteria when it comes to food, but it's just like, oh, your child is behind on vaccines. Here, take a bunch all at once to catch up. It's just, it defies logic. And it's just so maddening that doctors are going along with this. I just don't understand.
Christian, of religion. It's like a madness among doctors, pediatricians, and public health agencies. You're right. They're so cautious about food, so cautious about other things, but vaccination, even during pregnancy, and listen, that's pretty new. When my wife had my kids, there were no vaccines given to pregnant women. The infectious disease threats haven't changed. Now, a pregnant woman today is faced with the diphtheria, tetanus, acellular pertussis, inactivated flu, and now respiratory syncytial virus and the COVID-19 vaccine. So, this is, in my view, it's reckless, because during pregnancy, if a fever is provoked by the vaccines, and it can easily happen, then the women can lose their babies in the first trimester, a miscarriage, middle, that would be a stillbirth, or a premature delivery near the end. All of those are disasters, and they're provoked by vaccination.
It's so sad. It's so sad. Meanwhile, we're hearing that parents are questioning. They are more cautious, hesitant about the vaccine schedule. So we are getting the word out, despite the censorship that we experienced for the last few years. But right away, coming on the heels of these reports, you see the American Academy of Pediatrics is now calling for an end to basically any exemption. They say, we'll still take medical exemptions, but non-medical should be very rare. No, they don't want any non-medical vaccines, and even the medical ones they say should be very rare. And they're also using this measles narrative to call for this. So, are you concerned that they will be able to bully their way into disallowing exemptions for school?
Well, Christy, why don't you tell me what type of heat you could potentially face? I mean, are you having your child go through all the routine vaccines?
Myself?
Yeah.
Oh, I have 0 vaccines for my kids.
Okay, so there you go.
Dr. McCullough, I have a child who just turned 18, and then, like I said, a 7-month-old baby. So my 18-year-old did get some vaccines, but even then, way back then, I didn't like how they were like back to back. So even those, I was on one and then delayed, like very spaced apart. And then by the time I got to my youngest too, it was like, no, I'm not playing these experiments at all anymore. So it kind of waned as I had more children and I got more educated.
So you're a good example. So you have some completely unvaccinated children.
Yes.
And how are they?
Amazing. And honestly, Dr. McCullough, that's what makes me even more sad, because as I see them reach their milestones and smiles, I feel for the parents that are going along just like me, and then they go to an appointment, and it puts me in that empathetic of I cannot imagine just having all the excitement of seeing these milestones and then overnight see something change. That's just such a terrifying and so sad feeling.
It's true. And, right now we can consider combination vaccination at least a risk factor for the neuropsychiatric disorders. That's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is in right now 11% of children, autism, which is in 3.2% of children, allergic diseases like asthma, atopic dermatitis, food allergies, tics, seizure disorders. It's not looking good. And a recent report in JAMA indicated only 40% of parents plan to do the full schedule. And the principles are here, fewer vaccines are safer. Obviously, there can be fewer side effects. And if they're given later in life, beyond the period of critical immunologic and neurologic development, they're a lot safer. And certainly not given altogether. And so 40% of parents say they're going to do the full schedule, but 60% of parents say they're not. Now the American Academy of Pediatrics went hyperbolic on this and said, we're going to try to shut down exemptions. Now in Texas, we have philosophical, medical, and religious exemptions. I think that's what all states should have. In fact, Association of American Physicians and Surgeons passed a resolution in 2020 saying there should be no school requirements to begin with. We shouldn't have the requirements to begin with to even have to fool with exemptions.
Yeah. I mean, here in Texas, and that's why I wish more parents were educated that just find out what your state requires, because for Texas, I have to send something out and then they send me the forms back. Then I need to go and make sure I don't fill them out until I'm in front of a notary and then turn those things in. I believe there's new legislation that passed that they're going to make this even easier. But then I'm like going about my normal thing, like I'm actually ready to take them in. As the school year is starting, and I'm seeing that they want to do away with these exemptions altogether, and so that's terrifying.
Well, people.
I mean, it's not going to change what I do. I mean, they just won't go to school. But it's still sad.
It becomes very uncomfortable in Texas. We have what we perceive to be, a lot of medical freedom, but we're having to pass laws so you can download the form as opposed to getting it. You can see how twisted this is. The vaccine lobby is very powerful, and they are lobbying every step of the way so no child can get exemptions. Now, New York and California, Connecticut, and I believe West Virginia, this is terrible, where essentially there's just no way of getting out of this. In California, they limit each doctor. They can only give 5 exemptions, and when they do, they review their licenses. It's at the point where California, they're effectively forced into vaccination. No surprise, California has the highest rate of autism. There, the rate of autism is 5.2%. And listen to this, of those kids with autism, 27% have profound autism. That's an IQ less than 55, nonverbal, can't speak, head banging, unable to use the toilet or shower unassisted. They're essentially invalids for life. We now in California are over 1% of children like this.
It's so sad. And, we are learning more and more about how vaccine on these schedules is incentivized. It all goes back to follow the money. This same group, the American Academy of Pediatrics, claim that doctors don't profit. This is all for the good. When we vaccinate, they claim they don't profit from this, but there are reports elsewhere, like Revolver did this report that shows receipts showing that insurance kickbacks, they do pay these doctors to make sure all of their patients are vaccinated. I know I've experienced this myself. When I moved to California, I couldn't have a doctor because no one would take my children because they weren't fully vaccinated. So, wow. What can you tell me about the incentives for vaccinations when it comes to money?
Vaccines are, like I say, very different than other drugs. If people are below certain income levels or don't have insurance, the government steps in and actually covers vaccines. So there's all kinds of procurement, distribution, reimbursement to make sure doctors' offices are, in a sense, ready to go with vaccines. There are school administration programs as well that, again, government supported. And they have reporting to departments of community health. So vaccines are essentially to the consumer free of charge. And behind all these schemes are many, many motivational tools to make sure doctors, quote, fully vaccinate their panel of patients. We saw this acutely with COVID-19. Everything behind vaccines is centered around money and juicing the system. It's nearly $100 billion a year revenue, basically windfall to the companies providing vaccines because, the money's always there for them. They don't have to compete in the marketplace.
Now, we talked about how there's so much correlation between vaccines and autism and other side effects that can happen when you're piling these vaccines on. Obviously, the worst case scenario is death. And, our shared colleague, Ed Dowd, is talking about 5,000 vaccine-linked deaths a week. Is his claim when it comes to particularly this COVID vaccine. And, we talk about politics. We talk about will people be arrested for Russiagate and that why? Will people be arrested for the problems we had with elections? But I mean, a lot of us are like, hey, I just want to see people arrested for pushing deadly vaccines on people. Is enough being done with this MAHA movement? And, I did just see that there's been efforts to remove the, I don't know if I can say that right, thermosol, the mercury-based preservative. Is enough being done to try and keep people safe?
Well, I like how you set that up. So the priority ought to be loss of human life. So let's say loss of American lives. That's more important than the Epstein files or, Russiagate or the Mueller report or the Durham report or the Steele dossier. The loss of American lives ought to be the biggest thing up there in the media. So let's take the routine childhood vaccine schedule. Neil Miller published an important paper a few years ago. The vast majority of infant sudden deaths in previously healthy babies under the age of 1, it occurs within a few days of taking a big battery of vaccines. So just sudden infant death syndrome alone, there ought to be an all hands on deck investigation of, is it related to giving a big battery of vaccines? Looks like it is. Now the COVID-19 vaccine story, and I just reviewed this for this piece, according to the US CDC Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, through June 27, 2025, Christy, we're at 19,439 COVID vaccine deaths. Now, these are deaths reported by doctors and healthcare professionals who believe the vaccine is a cause of death, and I've reported these. I've reviewed hundreds of manuscripts from this database, and yes, the deaths are due to the COVID-19 vaccine. So the VAERS system is causation by proxy of reporting. Now, an accepted underreporting factor, according to the FDA, is 30. That would lead us to 583,170 Americans who have died of the COVID-19 vaccine. A biopharmaceutical catastrophe. Most deaths occurred in 2021. But still to this day, since boosters are on the market, and unfortunately some people still take them, we still have several hundred deaths today. Now enter in the new administration. So we have Trump and Robert F. Kennedy and Marty McCreary. Well, listen, this has now occurred on their watch over the course of 6 months. So you can imagine the predicament they're in. If tomorrow they said, oh, we're going to pull them off the market, they're not safe, the first thing people are going to ask is, why'd you wait so long?
Yeah, it's quite the predicament. But I mean, ultimately, like you said, this should be the highest priority. Ultimately, politics aside, people are dying and people are getting injured. And that should be the number one thing that we're seeing done. Is it enough to talk about removing mercury-based preservatives? Is it enough to talk about not requiring the mRNA vaccine or not recommending it? I mean, even that was kind of a PR flop. They came out, they said they were not going to require it. And then it was just like a week later, it was being recommended. It just kind of makes your head spin.
Right. Remember that the ACIP panel just recommends, they don't require anything. And they said, well, we're, healthy pregnant women, healthy children, we're not going to recommend it. But then they put this long list of things. But if a pregnant woman is, not very fit, she should take it. And they kind of, have all these additional layers of, still recommending it. They concluded that a third of Americans should be taking boosters. This was McCreary and Prasad in the New England Journal of Medicine. They published this. And at that time, fewer than 15% of people were even taking shots. So these two guys are completely out of touch. Actually, Prasad has kind of stepped down now. He's only there 90 days. This MAHA movement should focus on saving human life. They're getting distracted on food dyes or fluoride or postmenopausal hormones. It's as if the public health MAHA government officials want to talk about everything except COVID-19 vaccine injuries, disabilities, and deaths. Now, having said that, thiomarisol, which is a mercury contaminant in vaccines, it was removed largely from the childhood vaccines. It was still in adult flu shots. So there was only 4% of them left. They got them on the market. But again, the big problem is people who have injured, disabled, or died of the COVID vaccine. We need a massive research program. We need things to do right now to help people. People are still dying of subclinical mild pericarditis. A public health official, vaccine czar in Northern Europe, just died in his 50s. We just had a cardiologist at Baylor in Dallas die at the end of this year. My age, no explanation. We're seeing this over and over again. Ed Dowd's reporting working age people on the rolls of death and disability insurance. The spouses are cashing in because people are still dying of the COVID shots.
Now, we talk about the money incentives, money talks. We do have Representative Thomas Massey pushing a bill that would let people sue pharma, because that's another big reason why we got in this mess. As soon as they knew they didn't have to face liability, well, suddenly let's add 7 more vaccines to the recommended list of vaccines you should get. So obviously, big correlation there. Do you have any hope that we will get to a point where we can turn around and make these companies liable?
I think 2 things to happen. One would be rescinding the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, of which they really don't pay out any compensation anyway, make vaccine companies responsible. And then, of course, removing the PrEP Act, which is shielding Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen Novavax right now. And what will happen is very similar to the tobacco settlement. You'll see some giant, issuance, because Pfizer, Moderna are 100 billion to the positive. They're going to have to pay that back to all the families who have been injured or sadly had their loved ones die. They're going to lose in court. They know it. I think if those 2 things happen, the companies would immediately pull their products off the market. You wouldn't see a diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis. In my adult career, I've never tested anybody for a diphtheria or pertussis. They're legacy diseases we treat with a Z-Pack. Tetanus, we clean out wounds and give antibiotics. None of these things are compelling from a clinical indication or medical necessity perspective.
Now, bringing it back to your book, that's actually titled "Vaccines: Mythology, Ideology, and Reality." When I read about the book, it says that it's actually not a call to discard vaccines. So you're very strong in your stance here in this interview, but you say that the book itself is not necessarily a call to discard vaccines. It's just to call into question this halo that they have, this we can't even ask questions about. It's just science. It's settled science. So tell me about that. Why do you say it's not a call to discard?
Yeah, so you're asking about the reality. So, the vaccines certainly served a purpose when we had no answer. So we're having 500,000 measles cases per year, and there were several thousand measles deaths. And there's no doubt about it. Measles vaccination did drop measles cases. There's no doubt about it. But they're not perfect, and we still have outbreaks. Another example is the chickenpox vaccine. When I was a kid, I had chickenpox. Everybody I knew had chickenpox. Nowadays, I don't hear about any kids having chickenpox. So they did serve a purpose. However, there's always a consequence. With the chickenpox vaccine, now we have increased rates of shingles in adults because they took the chickenpox vaccine. There's multiple studies show that. So the point is there's always a trade-off. So the reality is vaccines can serve a purpose, but I think a future is going to be a very specific purpose. So let me give an example. A child born with cystic fibrosis, severe pulmonary condition, they probably should get the respiratory vaccines for the protection they can provide. A child born without a spleen or had the spleen taken out due to Hodgkin's treatment or car accident, they should get a specific set of vaccines against several encapsulated bacteria. So I think the future is going to be yes for vaccines, but very limited and specific indications, not one size fits all.
Dr. McCullough, thank you so much for your passion and your education on this, and willingness to look at it again, because I know you haven't always felt this way, but I just have so much respect for you for really digging in and having so much integrity in the face of so much persecution. So thank you so much.